Aloha, inspired moneymaker. Thanks for joining me today. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning viewer or listener, welcome back. It's so great to spend time together. Let's be real. Negotiation can be intimidating, whether it's asking for a raise, buying a car, or even splitting vacation costs with friends. A lot of us feel uncomfortable or unsure about how to get what we want without coming off as pushy or awkward. And that hesitation, it can cost you. You might end up paying more, earning less, or feeling walked over because you didn't speak up or didn't know how to handle the conversation. It's frustrating and it can feel like the deck is stacked against you, especially when the other person seems more confident or experienced. But here's the good news. Anyone can learn to be a great negotiator. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about strategy, communication, and knowing how to find solutions that work for everyone. And today we have just the panel to show you how. Our lineup of negotiation experts will share secrets behind successful deals. And whether it's in the boardroom, at the car dealership, or around the dinner table, they're going to break down proven strategies, share personal stories, and give you practical tips on how you can start the right way. By the end of this episode, I hope that we will all feel more confident, more prepared, and ready to walk into any negotiation knowing that we have the tools to come out on top. So stick around. This conversation could change the way you make decisions and advocate for yourself in every part of your life. Before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by my financial advisory firm, Runnymede Capital Management. I want to invite you to take advantage of our 3-minute financial plan. Head over to inspiredmoney.fm/getplan. It just takes 3 minutes and you'll get a personalized snapshot to help kickstart your financial journey. It's easy to do. And afterwards, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. So let's bring in our guest panelists. We have Keld Jensen. He's a globally acclaimed negotiation strategist, author, and speaker, ranked number 3 in the world by Global Gurus in 2025. With over 30 years of experience in behavioral economics and trust-based deal-making, he is the founder of the award-winning SMARTnership strategy, transforming negotiation practices worldwide. He's advised top organizations like Lego, Rolls-Royce, and the Danish government, and has been recognized among the top 100 thought leaders in trust, as well as recipient of the World Commerce and Contracting Innovation Award. His pioneering work in NegoEconomics emphasizes value creation through collaboration, transparency, and trust. Keld, so excited to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to have fun. Also in the house is Dr. Joshua Weiss. He's a leading expert in negotiation, conflict resolution, and leadership, serving as a senior fellow at the Harvard Negotiation Project and co-founder of the Global Negotiation Initiative at Harvard University. He's the director of the MS in Leadership and Negotiation at Bay Path University and the author of multiple books, including the Book of Real-World Negotiations and the forthcoming or recently released Getting Back to the Table, 5 Steps to Reviving Stalled Negotiations. Josh, welcome.
Thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to be with you. Appreciate it.
And you said you and Keld have been crossing paths frequently.
Yeah, we get ourselves into a lot of trouble, and it's a lot of fun, and we have great conversations along the way. So it's a pleasure to know them and to work with them.
Fantastic. We have Linda Swindling. She's a negotiation expert, author, and keynote speaker who was recently inducted into the NSA Speaker Hall of Fame. She helps leaders confidently negotiate high-stakes deals and workplace challenges using proven strategies that drive results. With a background as a successful attorney, mediator, and university professor at the University of Texas at Dallas, Linda empowers organizations to communicate effectively, enhance business relationship, and ask outrageously to achieve their goals. Linda.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great.
I need to ask more outrageously. So I look forward to the lessons and the book.
Read the book, right?
And rounding out our panel today, we have Dr. Susan Heitler. Am I saying that correctly?
Exactly.
Dr. Susan Heitler, she's a clinical psychologist, author, conflict resolution expert, known for her innovative therapy techniques that help people, couples, and families navigate emotional and relational challenges. With best-selling books and a widely viewed TEDx talk, she gets over 26 million readers on Psychology Today. She's made a global impact in the fields of mental health, communication, and personal growth. Susan, you're here coming from the other side of the world.
Correct. And a pleasure to join you.
It's so great to have all of you here. I look forward to having this discussion on helping us become better negotiators so that we can be proud to say, I am a negotiator. Let's go straight into segment one.
Effective negotiation begins with thorough preparation. Entering discussions with a clear strategy enhances confidence, improves decision-making, and increases the likelihood of achieving favorable outcomes. Defining objectives and priorities is the first step. Establishing clear priorities, knowing non-negotiable terms, and identifying areas of flexibility create a structured approach. Understanding your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, ensures decisions are strategic rather than reactive. Researching the other party's background, goals, and constraints uncovers opportunities for alignment. Anticipating their motivations can identify areas for compromise and mutual benefit. A proactive concession strategy ensures compromises align with key objectives without weakening overall positioning. Strong communication skills further strengthen negotiations. Active listening, clear messaging, and nonverbal cues build rapport and enhance understanding. While preparation is essential, adaptability is equally important. Unforeseen challenges may arise, and the ability to adjust while staying focused on core goals drives negotiation success.
Keld, tell us a little bit about SMARTnership, the approach, and how we can best prepare for negotiation.
Yeah, I love to. Preparation obviously is a key in any negotiation. I often say that not preparing is the same as preparing for failure, right? But let's take a step back even before we talk a lot about the details in preparation, because I often say that we have to negotiate on how to negotiate. And what is it I mean by that? Well, Adam, we actually perceive negotiation very differently, all of us. Some perceive negotiation like playing tennis. Some people perceive negotiation like playing chess. So imagine that these two people looking at negotiation that differently enter the same conference room and start playing chess and tennis. It's going to look awkward and weird. So part of my preparation and the world that I'm in is actually having people start negotiating on how we want to negotiate, because we don't negotiate the same way. United Nations in New York has never declared an international standard on how we have to negotiate. So it's dangerous just sitting in your own world and do your own preparation. You really have to make sure that the counterpart is on the same level as you and negotiate the same way as you. So I know it sounds weird. A lot of my students and clients, when I raise this topic the first time, look at me like I just arrived from a different planet, but we have to sit down and negotiate how to negotiate before we start the actual negotiation.
How do you have that conversation? Do you do that before meeting face-to-face?
It depends. If it's a really important big negotiation, let's say merger acquisition or huge contract negotiation, we actually carve out time, perhaps the week before, where the meeting is just about discussing how we're going to negotiate Thursday next week. If it's a smaller negotiation, you can do it the first 15 minutes before you dive into it. So it really depends on how important it is and how well prepared your counterpart might be. And if you know each other, it's the first time you're going to meet.
Josh, how do we distinguish between over-preparing and maintaining flexibility to adapt throughout a negotiation?
Yeah, Andy, it's a really, really important question. And I think that when people are learning to negotiate, they tend to over-prepare. And the reality is that in all our negotiations, we're working with incomplete information. And so that actually ends up being a bit of a recipe for problems and challenges, because when you lay out a plan in your mind and then the negotiation doesn't go the way you imagined and new information comes to light or gets interjected, I often call that sort of the freak out factor for people, because they have not thought about, what am I going to do if my plan doesn't unfold in the way that I would like? So you mentioned in your video the importance of adaptability. And so I often talk to people about thinking about contingency planning, right? So Keld raised the idea of chess. When you play chess, you have to have a contingency planning mindset. You have to think a couple of steps ahead, but you also have to create different routes to the same end. And when I help people to prepare in that way, they end up being far more comfortable and they don't lose their sense of confidence because they have different avenues if something gets blocked or they learn something new that they didn't know. And that is always going to be the case in negotiation. You're always going to have new information that gets put in front of you. And in this way, you kind of train yourself to not be surprised, if you will, and to expect the unexpected.
Linda, you advocate for asking outrageously. How do we get over our fear of negotiating?
That is a great question. The biggest suggestion is negotiate with strangers. Go practice on strangers. When I had young kids, little Tykes toys were so expensive. And I didn't want to go bargain in my own neighborhood. So I would drive over across town and practice there. Practice everywhere you go, because here's what happens in this preparation. It's a mindset. And it feels really the same to negotiate with some of these big dollar cases as it does face to face with somebody saying, can I buy that toy for less money? You don't want to have those emotions for the very first time when it's a big deal. You want to practice feeling a little uneasy, practice asking for a little bit more, or ask them to take a little bit less when it's safe.
You surprised me. I thought you were going to tell me to practice with my kids, with my wife. And now you're telling me
those are tougher negotiations sometimes, aren't they?
That's my department.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Susan then. Let's go to your department. You've observed many parallels between business negotiation and couples therapy. Same rules for preparation?
Well, people come into therapy because they're having problems. They're not getting along together because there's some issues that they differ on. So in the business world, you call it negotiation. Doesn't quite fit for home. You might call it conflict resolution. You might call it shared decision making or collaborative problem solving. It's the identical steps, whichever of those terms you use. The bottom line is that couples who know how to do this process, they live happily ever after. They enjoy each other. They continue loving each other. There's no fighting. Couples that don't have the skills, both the communication skills that are safe, make talking safe, and beyond that, the 3 steps of resolving differences. The couples that don't have those, marriage is much harder, much more fragile.
Talk a little bit about the book, Getting to Yes, and how that influenced you in your work.
Oh, yes. Well, I was a little mad when it came out because I'd been having a very similar set of thoughts as I'd been thinking at that time about conflict resolution. I was newly married and I decided I better figure out this business. So when I was first married, our way of conflict resolution was he used to go up on the balcony and I'd go as far away from that on the bottom floor, and we'd kind of talk from there. I've learned a lot since then. When the book came out, Getting to Yes, I realized I have different words for the same phenomena. The words in Getting to Yes are very effective for business situations. Individuals, couples, we don't talk about the interests that lie behind positions. Instead, in my first book, which was called From Conflict to Resolution, I proposed a parallel vocabulary for home, which was there are initial ideas of what people would like to do, of plans of action. Then people have to dip down a level to explore the underlying concerns, because therapists think and personal issues we think of in terms of looking deeper as opposed to like a cards metaphor, looking at the interests that lie behind position. That second step, though, of clarifying whether we call it interests or underlying concerns, has to move then to finding solutions. So solutions are win-win, just like in getting to yes, to the extent that they're responsive to everybody's underlying concern, his, hers, theirs, however many. And that's the same as in getting to yes. So the bottom line is I appreciate the book very much, both for all it's done for the world and it's helped me clarify the ideas that were nascent for me at the time.
Andy, can I just say a quick word about getting to yes? I think
Sure.
for me, getting to yes changed the landscape and the perspective on negotiation. I think before that, people had an approach to negotiation that we often call primarily distributive or positional, where people would go back and forth and barter and haggle and things along those lines. And getting to yes sort of changed that and said, look, if you're going to be negotiating with the same people, the same companies over and over again, does that strategy really help you? Does it really make the most sense? And in the trainings that I do, and I'm sure it's similar with Keld and Linda, when I ask people, how many of your negotiations one-offs, you're going to negotiate with this person and then never see them again, versus with the same people or the same companies / organizations or governments, usually it's about 90% is with the same people, same organizations, same companies over time, and about 10% one-off. And if that's the reality, before getting to yes, there wasn't really an approach that thought differently about negotiation. And I think that was really the genius behind it. And I think that an entire industry has been built around that because of that reality that in good business, you have to be thinking about your short-term needs, but also the long-term relationship, because over time, negotiations should get better. Deals should get better. You should maximize value because you're more willing to share information. And it was a really important mind shift. And I think why it's still on the bestseller list 45 years later.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for
Josh,
that.
if you think about long-term relationships, boy, husbands and wives definitely need those skills. There's a long-term, hopefully, relationship.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go to segment 2. We're going to talk about the power of communication.
Successful negotiation goes beyond presenting arguments. It's about strategic communication, active listening, and reading nonverbal cues. These skills build rapport, clarify misunderstandings, and create win-win solutions. Active listening ensures both sides feel heard and valued. Engaging fully, paraphrasing key points, and asking clarifying questions demonstrate respect and encourage openness. This approach uncovers underlying concerns and strengthens trust. Persuasion techniques enhance negotiation effectiveness. Storytelling makes positions relatable, while framing aligns messages with the other party's values. Strategic concessions build goodwill and encourage reciprocity. Nonverbal communication is equally critical. Open body language, eye contact, and mirroring establish rapport, while a calm tone reinforces authority. Observing the other party's gestures and expressions provides insight into their mindset. By refining communication strategies, negotiators gain confidence, influence outcomes, and create agreements that serve both sides.
Keld, should we be thinking about concessions when we're having a negotiation, or with your NegoEconomics, negotiation economics, is it not really like what you're giving up?
Yes and no. Once again, let me take another step back and say, why do organizations negotiate? Now, I call myself a commercial negotiator, so I let Susan cover the private part and I talk about business, I assume just like Josh and Linda. And what I say is, why is it two organizations negotiate with each other? They do it for one reason only, and that is to create and distribute value. I repeat that, to create and distribute value. And what I often see in some negotiators' world is that they feel they have to argue a lot. So they go in there and they don't negotiate. I call it haggling. They argue, we should get a better price because of, or we should get better payment terms because of. And this segment obviously talk about communication and active listening. It's one of the secrets to be a great negotiator, and I'm sure that the panel will agree with me, is that listening, really listening, not listening because you want to prepare what you're going to say yourself, but really listening to the value, the background, the interest of the counterpart, and then asking questions. If I should put just one word on what separates the great negotiator from the not so good negotiator, is the ability to really listen and ask qualified questions. So for instance, if you came to me and said, I would like to change delivery time, I should not reply, we can't do that, or we would love to do that. Instead, I should ask, what is the value to you? What is it you want to change that delivery time? And, ask for something in return. So you just use the word concession. I'm not a big fan of concessions. Unilateral concessions especially are dangerous, because if I get something away for free, you may misunderstand that and feel that, hey, that was easy. If I started this negotiation giving you 3% discount, you might be feeling, hey, we've been sitting here for 5 minutes. If I got 3% that easy, why wouldn't I get 5 or 7? So unilateral concession is a no-go in my world. But even more importantly, I just want to repeat that, ask question and truly, truly listen. And I feel, and that's the last thing, then I don't want to talk more because we have lots of bright people on the panel, but we have lost the ability to listen as human beings. I don't know whether we should blame social media or what, but we have a tendency to be worse off listening to each other than ever before. And that's really a key thing. Dr. Dan Shapiro from Harvard has a lot of knowledge about that and called it the tribal effect. So if anybody's interested, dive into Dr. Dan Shapiro.
And if you don't mind me backing on to what Keld said, is, it's living in the question. It's when in doubt, you ask a question. And that's, you had said, why do we prepare it? So we can be present. What I like as a definition of negotiations, it seems to take some pressure off my students and off the people I've worked with, is it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. So it's a discussion. We're not trying to beat each other up. We're not trying to out-strategize each other. We are really aiming at trying to agree. It may not work. We may walk away. Our agreement may be we can't have a deal right now. But that Oxford Dictionary definition is a really good one that kind of takes some pressure off and makes it more of that conversation you were talking about.
How does one react to if you feel like the other side's being too aggressive in their negotiation?
I can go with that question.
Sure.
It takes two to escalate, for the most part. If one person begins to escalate, there's nothing like, excuse me, I need to go get a drink of water. Take a break. I tell my clients, anger is a stop sign. What do you do at a stop sign? Hopefully you stop. So if somebody's escalating, take a break or pause or change the topic and bring the tone down. Why do people escalate? They escalate in order to dominate and get their way. That's not collaborative problem solving. I like what Linda said. It should be a discussion, a collaborative dialogue. And as soon as the tone intensifies or there's negative energy coming out, or there's no listening. Keld, you were right on in terms of couples and families. Listening and tone are probably the two critical dimensions.
Josh, you wanted to say something.
No, I very much agree with Susan. And one of the kind of things that I often will say to folks that I'm working with or whomever is, the one thing that you have control over in a negotiation is your reaction and your response. And so managing that is really critical. And what the other negotiator does is important, but it's also not defining. And so you can control how you act and how you approach things. And I think it's really important, that, again, if you go back to the notion about incomplete information, which I think is such an important dynamic, we gather information by asking good questions, to Keld's point, right? That when we ask a question, an open-ended kind of question, when we're kind of probing and thinking, often we get information back that is really, really valuable. And it helps us to sort of think about what's possible, given where we are and what the circumstances are. And so I'm a really big fan of that. And I think listening is hard because we tend to have a internal conversation that's going on in our mind during a negotiation or during any kind of conflict or whatever it might be. We start to ready our response. And when we do that, we're no longer listening. And I think that's a classic mistake that a lot of people make. And what really gets in the way of us actually really listening well is starting to think when somebody, especially when somebody says something that you don't agree with, or maybe that you think their perception is off, you're thinking in your mind, I've got to correct that perception before anything else happens. And while you're doing that, right, nothing else is getting in. So I think it's very important to understand that dynamic and to kind of clear your mind. I've worked with folks who do a lot of improv and training people in thinking to be present. And one of the things that really comes out of that is that you do clear your mind and you're not starting to think down the road, but you're actually in the moment and really listening carefully. And in the little clip, Andy, last quick thing, which is you mentioned stories. I'm a very big fan of stories. I think they have a way of disarming the other negotiator. I've had scenarios where people often say, what do I do when I'm trying to collaborate with somebody and they're being very competitive? And the best response I have is share a story of what something could look like, or you've had a past negotiation that's similar to this, and here's how you dealt with that kind of a situation, because people tend to view stories very differently. And interestingly enough, there's some really fascinating research by some folks at Stanford that say that when you start telling people a story in a realm like negotiation, they begin to see themselves in that story, even though they weren't even there, but they can imagine what that might look like.
Andy, I wanted to add one more thing. I wrote another book called Stop Complainers and Energy Drainers, and it's how to negotiate work drama to get more done. And the research behind that was really surprising, because I really had one or two people that kind of irritated me, and they would get angry, and I, felt different ways around them. But there were actually more ways that people showed anger. We found 5 big ways that people could show and show emotion, and it was usually around a need not being filled. So, we had whiners, and we had the complicators, and we had these really aggressive, assertive people, and we had, and we went through all of those. But the big thing was being curious. So when you're asking questions, your mindset is really, I wonder why this person is usually calm is doing this. Wonder what need they're trying to fill. And that helps you stay calm yourself. If you can just say, okay, I'm like a reporter. I'm just going to ask questions, see if I can figure out, is this person overreacting to get attention, or do they feel like they're not connected, or do they feel like things aren't getting done, or things aren't organized or stable? What's going on? And if you can live there, that helps you not engage, which is really, that's the beauty about negotiation, is if you can get to reality and kind of think more logically, you can probably help solve the problem or help them see a way through the problem.
Keld, is the active listening and asking good questions, is that the gateway to building trust, which is so important?
Absolutely, and showing an interest in the counterpart, obviously. I don't know if any of you have tried to travel to Asia, and I mention Asia specifically because their understanding of hospitality is so much more advanced than here in the West. So let's assume, Andy, that you check into the Oriental in Bangkok, right? Known as one of the better hotels in the world. And you check in and you go to a room and you're unhappy with your room. So you go back to the reception at the Oriental to complain. Now, how do you think the staff at the reception at the Oriental are going to behave? Are they going to argue with you and say, oh, Andy, shut up. You're checked into one of the best hotels in the world. Go back to your room or you can leave. No, they're not going to do that. Are they going to agree with you and say, you're absolutely right, Andy. You got the worst room in the entire hotel? No, they're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're saying, Andy, I understand you feel there's a problem. Let me see if I can help you deal with that problem you feel you got. Did you get that? They don't agree, they don't disagree, they just show empathy, right? So I understand my counterpart. And what I often find, Andy, that a lot of negotiators who messes up big time is that they guess or they assume what the counterpart wants. I often sit with clients that are saying, well, we know what they want. And I say, how do you know that? Well, they always want that. Okay, so you know it now. What they always wanted is also what they want tomorrow. We're not allowed to assume or guess. We need to know. So back to what we just talked about right now, questions and listening and really showing true empathy is essential to be successful in any negotiation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now I want to go to the Mandarin Oriental. and live my best life. Let's go to segment 3.
Emotions and mindset shape negotiation outcomes, influencing confidence, decision-making, and adaptability under pressure. Managing these factors helps negotiators remain composed, think strategically, and secure favorable agreements. Fear and anxiety can undermine confidence, but preparation reduces uncertainty and builds self-assurance. Reframing stress as heightened awareness enhances focus rather than triggering pressure. Positive self-talk and skill building further strengthen confidence, leading to more effective interactions. Cognitive biases also impact decision-making. For example, loss aversion can lead to risk-averse choices, while anchoring skews perception by placing undue weight on initial figures. Recognizing these biases helps negotiators stay objective. Emotional intelligence is key in reading the other party's responses, managing conflicts, and maintaining a cooperative atmosphere. Mindfulness techniques, such as controlled breathing and reflection, improve focus and reduce emotional interference. By managing psychological influences, negotiators navigate discussions with clarity, confidence, and strategic control.
Linda, you started talking about emotion in the previous segment. What advice do you have for people dealing with anxiety and fear over rejection, over getting a no?
Yeah, I haven't practiced listening to no. So I will say, okay, close your eyes. And here I'm going to say something to you. You're ready. Don't do it if you're driving. No, I'm not going to do that. No, that's a crazy offer. No, no, no. And then I say, open your eyes. Did you survive that? If you're not hearing no, you're not asking for enough. We need to get used to the fact that people are going to say no at times. And then when we hear them say no, we don't shut down. We just ask them about it. So back to the live in the question. I heard you say no. Can you tell me about that? And often people will give you an explanation. You'll think, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Or they didn't KNOW. They didn't know something that I need to educate them on. But just start asking a lot so that when you hear it the first time, it doesn't shock you.
Josh, I want to ask you, I've heard you talk about emotions in negotiating. I think oftentimes we hear about, oh, you have to, don't show your emotions. Don't show your emotions. Don't be emotional. I think you say really you have to use your emotion effectively and realistically.
Yeah, listen, human beings are emotional and logical creatures. If I told you we should keep logic out of the negotiation, you would think I was an idiot and you'd wonder why I'm on this panel. It's the same thing with emotions. I think people get into trouble when they try to suppress them. They are part of who we are. And emotions emerge because we care, because things are important to us. So you get into trouble when you try to push them aside and act as if nothing is wrong. And unfortunately, for most human beings, we're not very good at hiding our emotions. We kind of wear them out there. And if you learn to look at nonverbal behaviors and things along those lines, like it's easy to tell that there's a problem and that the words are not matching the actions of the individual. So I think it's much better to spend effort and time, which is what it takes to become emotionally intelligent, and to bring your emotions to the table in a productive way. I don't hesitate to say, I have to tell you that I'm a bit frustrated with where we are, so that they know, the other negotiator knows where I am. And I'm not destroying the process. I'm not blowing anything up. I'm simply saying, look, I'm frustrated because I thought that we would, there was more common ground here, or there were more opportunities to make headway, and we haven't. And that, frankly, from my point of view, typically opens up a productive conversation about, well, why are you so frustrated? What were you expecting when you came in here, or whatever it might be? And so I believe that it's really important to bring your emotions in that way, where you're having them, you're expressing them, but you're having them with some control, so that you don't push the process in a direction that isn't very productive. And I think that's what people tend to think of when they hear emotions and negotiation, is the downside. But there are emotions that drive us. Passion and things along those lines are emotions that are productive and important when it comes to negotiation.
So Josh, you get A+ on what to do with negative emotion like frustrated. as parents often say to kids, use your words. In other words, if you say, I'm getting frustrated, even though there may be some fairly strong emotion within you, you stay calm and you're sharing verbally what's going on. That's a whole different story from in your voice and in your intensity, acting out the emotion. So that was brilliant, I will say, very helpful. The other point I want to make validates the importance of emotions and what Josh said about they're there for a reason. Emotions are like traffic signals. Anxiety, that means there's a danger ahead. So calm down and figure out what the danger is. And what do you do at a blinking yellow light is what anxiety is like. You slow down, you look around, you gather more information, and you proceed, but with caution. So anger is a red light. What do you do at a red light or a stop sign? You stop. If you proceed when you're angry, you're just going to antagonize everybody else. And also, your brain will work less effectively. Your frontal lobes turn off to the extent that your anger turns on. Depression, that's another one. Oh, that's a sign that you've given up on something that you really want. So ask yourself, wait, what do I want that I'm not getting? It can come out, that question can come out both with anger and with depression. There's something that I want that I'm not getting, or there's something that I'm getting that I don't want. That same pair of questions are appropriate either when you're feeling angry or you're feeling, discouraged, depressed, down.
Thank you. I appreciate that, especially since conflicts at home seem to be potentially even more emotionally charged when we have conflict with kids or a spouse.
Yes, people tend to act better at work than at home.
I don't know. I was an employment attorney and I saw some pretty bad actors sometimes. One thing I wanted to kind of support with Josh and Susan was I trust people more when they're telling me their emotion than when I can tell there's something going wrong. Most of us, we can see it, as you said, but if you don't say, look, I'm feeling frustrated about this, or I'm surprised, or I'm a little bit nervous based on what you just said, then we know that we can trust them, that they're telling us the truth instead of hiding something.
Keld, how do emotions influence financial decision-making and negotiations according to behavioral economics?
Oh, a lot. I always laugh when I read Financial Times or Washington Post or New York Times or what have you, where it says that company A have done a deal with company B. And I apologize for my language, but I think that's a lot of BS. That never happened. That was just that make a deal with Susan. And if Susan was replaced by Maria, that deal could have fallen apart. So all business is human. Let me start by saying that. We have done intensive studies on trust. Trust is one of my cornerstones when we talk about negotiation. And one thing I want to say right away is I think we should verbalize trust as well. I often encourage my clients to have trust on the agenda. So we start off talking about trust. What happened, Linda, if you and I are negotiating and you have less trust in me, you're allowed to verbalize that. And I should be allowed to do the same thing towards you. That's one thing. The other thing, back to trust, we have found in our studies, and I just stand on the shoulders of people way bigger than me. One of them is Dr. Kahneman, who have studied behavioral economics, and I'm sure most of our listeners know about Kahneman. If they don't, please study whatever he's done already, because he actually clearly identified that we'd rather do business with somebody we like and trust that has a worse product with a higher price than we would do business with somebody we don't like and don't trust that has the most competitive product at the lowest price. And I did my doctorate studies studying trust and negotiation and AI. And we'd actually capitalized and put a value on trust, and hang on now, up to 34%. So that means that if we are trusting an individual, a product, a company, we are willing to pay up to 34% more just based on that emotion. And that is obviously an emotion. So, and the last thing I want to say, by the way, as well, Andy, is that now the headline of the segment here was controlling the psychology game. I don't like the word game in negotiation. I don't think we're playing games with each other. I do have colleagues out there that are publishing books saying you should do this to outmaneuver the counterpart and show this and blah, 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 whatever. I don't think it's a game. I think it's human beings sitting down. We should just be honest, transparent, and figure out how can you and I make 2 + 2 equal more than 4. My job is not trying to outmaneuver you and win at your expense. If your purpose is not to win at my expense. And we can only do that by collaborating, creating trust, and be transparent without becoming naive, though. But I think that's really essential to succeed in negotiation as well.
I like what you say about trust. I was struck how much that coincides with one emotion that we haven't talked about, which is, I'm not sure if it's an emotion, but positivity. People who exude interest, enjoyment, playfulness, oh, that was a good idea, appreciation. Those, first of all, those help everybody stay calmer and think more openly. They also engender trust. They also engender generosity. So I think paying lots of attention to how much positivity people are giving off in a negotiation makes a massive difference. I'm curious, though, about your thoughts on that. In the business world, when you like somebody, and usually we like people who give off positivity, if it's real, I'm not talking about false positivity.
No, I love what you said, Susan. I agree with everything. A big study was done as well. The usual car salesman here in the US, when you go in and want to sell your car, right? And they start criticizing your car. It's terrible and it doesn't look good. It's been driving too long. And, I can't give you a good price because you got a horrible trade in there. They actually found that if that car salesman, old school car salesman, did the opposite, but start praising your car, what a wonderful car you got, that you maintained it so well, they actually got a way better deal than the car salesman start criticizing your product. So I completely love and embrace what you said there about being positive. I agree with you completely.
I will quote that study with my clients.
That car salesperson has skinny children, if that's what they're doing on the used cars. I think part of your positivity, and sometimes you have to be a cheerleader for the process. I think we can get this done. Let's keep at it. You've given some good experiences. It's that, Susan, but it's also seeing possibilities. So people can be positive and not expand their scope or look around or even consider something else. So I think that goes with, being willing to listen to somebody else's point of view or consider possibilities you all didn't come into the room with or on the Zoom call with.
I have one question for you all before moving on. This idea of a psychological game, what I'm hearing all of you saying is that it's not so much a psychological game where you're trying to manipulate somebody. It's more a collaborative effort between two parties to get to a favorable outcome. If the other side views it as manipulation, a psychological game, what's a judo move for you to try to change the conversation to be more collaborative?
Andy, maybe I'll just jump in quick. One of the things that I've found actually is there are a lot of people that don't know there's another way to negotiate. They actually think this is how they learn to negotiate, and this is what they think they're supposed to do. So for me, what I typically will do is say, listen, we can go down that road and we might be able to, reach some deal, but it's not going to be the best deal. And I'm not actually really interested in just, going through the motions. I actually think we could do a lot better if there's a way in which we could figure out how to collaborate. And much of the time people will say, what do you mean? Or, they might stay with, I don't want to collaborate. Like, I don't see you as a partner here. And there's, negotiation is one process about achieving your objective. And I think it's really important for your listeners to understand, for me, my perspective on negotiation is not about reaching agreement. It's about meeting your objective as best as possible. And if you sit down and go through a process and you say, you know what, through this, I've come to realize that I can actually perhaps exercise my BATNA or whatever it might be, which is my best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and go elsewhere because that actually meets my needs better. And what's interesting is when you change the frame of what it is that you're doing at the negotiation table, I see this with my students and people that I train. The minute I tell them negotiation is not about reaching agreement, they're like, wait, what? And there's a big sigh of relief because there's something called agreement bias that is very real, that people believe that if their goal is to reach agreement in negotiation, they will do so, and they will do so in a way that doesn't meet their objectives. It's just to get an agreement because that's what they think they should be doing. And so I think with people who you're up against, for example, in that way, who have this orientation that negotiation is this game, it's a manipulative one, etc., start with the notion that there's a different way to do this, and that would be your preference, especially if it's a scenario where the long-term relationship is part of the deal and matters greatly. You can begin to show them why, and that you can reveal some information. I typically will say to somebody, if I want them to do something, I'm going to take the first step. It's a small step because I want to be cautious, but I want them to understand what I'm trying to get at. So I'll say, look, I'm going to share something with you that's important to us that you may not know. And my hope is that you're going to reciprocate. And if we can get into that mode, now we're doing what Keld was talking about, which is back and forth reciprocity, sharing of information so that we can not just reach a deal, but reach the best deal.
Anyone else?
I call them on it. I say, wow, we can't, just what you just said, Josh, but that sounded a lot like positioning, or that sounded a lot like, and I'll tell a tactic. I said, I'm really here interested in a long-term relationship. And whether it's with me doing this particular deal or something else for my client, I want to leave with a better relationship than when we started. So let's start again. Tell me what really is a win for you. Tell me what you were really trying to seek. And if we can't do it, I'll be honest with you and tell you. So I try to be very honest with people because that's your credibility. Also, my last name is Swindling. Did y'all see that name? Not easy.
You're tough. Keld, you had something to say?
Yes, I love what everybody is saying and completely agree. I think it's very important to understand that a lot of people negotiate what I would call a very old school, in a very old school fashion, not because they choose to, but because, as Josh said, they don't know the alternative. So they're basically unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. And just to segue into the next segment, not to take your role as the host here, Andy, but I was doing a workshop just a few weeks ago for a Fortune 500 organization here in the US. And I talk a lot about trust and transparency and honesty and all that. And I had an executive in that class who was not joking, raised his hand and said, isn't it unethical to be honest and transparent in negotiation? And I was thinking, this is where we are right now in the world. There are people out there who actually think that negotiation is about manipulating the counterpart. And I don't know where they get it from. I'm pretty sure most parents are not raising their kids to lie and bluff and manipulate. So they're getting it from somewhere else. And could be some books out there. It could be some Hollywood movies. I don't know what it is. But there are some people, and they don't actually do it because they're bad or want to be bad, but they just don't. They don't know, as just said, the alternative route.
I like what you say, because sometimes we have to recognize, the person I'm talking with is culturally or personality-wise not able to do collaborative win-win problem solving, in which case find another person to work with. It's a little difficult if you're a spouse and you have a spouse who's not willing to listen, who just wants his or her way, who uses anger. That's a recipe for divorce. And in the countries of the world, countries also have to get along together. And if one country says, no, I'm going to bomb you, or I'm going to kill your people to get what I want, or what I want is for you to disappear, and I'll just take all the land, thank you very much. You can't negotiate. And then power is what makes the decision.
Thank you, Susan. Before moving to the next segment, I just want to say thank you to viewers who are out there, Kevin, Luis, Simone, and then mention that Dario even shared a Spotify link with a great episode of Josh Weiss talking about storytelling. So I will leave that in the show notes. Let's go to segment 4.
Ethical negotiation centers on fairness, transparency, and long-term relationship building. Negotiators who approach discussions with integrity foster trust and create lasting agreements. Honesty and transparency establish credibility. Providing truthful information and avoiding misrepresentation prevent misunderstandings and set a positive tone. Clear communication about intentions and constraints enhances trust. Respect and empathy are essential. Actively listening, acknowledging concerns, and valuing diverse perspectives lead to solutions that serve both parties' interests rather than one-sided gains. Seeking reasonable compromises rather than pursuing an unfair advantage strengthens professional and personal relationships, paving the way for future collaboration. Preparation and accountability uphold ethical standards. Understanding negotiation dynamics, defining moral boundaries, and maintaining consistency demonstrate reliability. Holding oneself accountable ensures trust and prevents conflicts. By prioritizing ethical principles, negotiators secure strong agreements and build a reputation for integrity.
Keld, you got us started talking about ethics and trust. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, data or support-wise? You have a one-pager that you say is really helpful, where people promise not to block or lie.
Yes, that is true. We have kind of a code of conduct in negotiation that we share both with clients and use in negotiations as well. So we present the code of conduct to the counterpart before we start negotiating that lists a number of items that we believe that we should behave accordingly to. Now I talked about trust already, and I can talk about trust for days here. So let me do it very, very brief. Assume, Andy, that I am selling an AirPod here, right? And I've been selling that to you for years, and we've been working together for 6 or 7 years. You like me as a supplier. We're very happy with each other. And, it's been going absolutely perfectly. You are buying hundreds of these AirPods every single year. Now, suddenly what happens, Andy, is a new supplier pops up on the market and offering the exact same product, the exact same AirPod. But this new supplier, you get this weird stomach sensation. You don't really like that individual and you don't really trust that individual. That happens sometimes, back to emotions, as we talked about a few minutes ago. Now, the big question here is, Andy, who would you prefer to do business with? The one you've been working with for 6 years, you like and trust, or the new one that pops up that you don't like and don't trust? However, the new one you don't like and don't trust is 1% cheaper. Now, we've been repeating this study over and over again, and we found that people are willing to pay up to 34% more from a simple product like this one from a supplier they trust and like compared to the one they don't trust and don't like. And the funny part is that it is happening in our subconscious world. So what happens is, from a psychology point of view, we find the excuse to add the emotional part, to tell our boss or superior or spouse or whatever. Then we find some facts that prove that our emotional decision was absolutely right. So back to the topic of this segment, the trust and the power and the fairness in negotiation is essential. And it's not just because it's a nice thing to have, it has a monetary value. And I attack the whole discussion about trust from a monetary value, because otherwise people just, shake their head and say, yeah, it's a good thing to have. But the second we can measure it in a spreadsheet, suddenly people pay attention.
Money talks. Linda, does that align with the studies that you've done, that you have to like the person?
Well, sometimes you don't like them, but you can appreciate them and respect them. And I like to call it wintegrity, or winning with integrity. You can trust that I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. So when I'm negotiating with someone, yes, definitely I want to like them. In our studies, a third of the people will flat out turn you down, will say no to you if they don't like, trust, or respect you, or you're not polite, you're not considerate. So one way to help that is to think about, how would this be a durable agreement? How can I trust this person to ethically do what they say they're going to do? And that's pretty important. And if you don't have that trust, or you don't think that they really do have that integrity, then you're probably going to put a lot more effort into monitoring it and holding them accountable. So where it comes to integrity and winning and having that ethical and going, and combining those two, it takes a lot less effort if you have built that trust, if you like and trust and respect them, and if you feel like they do the same thing, that they're not going to burn you if a deal goes bad and you're not in the room to protect the deal.
Josh, what are some of the pressing or most pressing ethical dilemmas negotiators face today?
Well, I think one of the things is that, negotiators are very susceptible as human beings to biases, and we have lots of ways of justifying our behavior. I actually just published a book called Getting Back to the Table, where I explore, the book is really about setbacks and failures in negotiation and how do you learn from them. And one of the things that I talk about is actually that there are a lot of biases that get in our way and prevent us from learning because we're very busy protecting our reputation or not wanting to confront the fact that we failed. And so biases are a really important one. And, it's interesting. I teach negotiation. One of the things that we do around ethics, there's a professor named Richard Schell who talks about 3 different schools of negotiation: the poker school, the idealist school, and the pragmatist school. And the poker school is one where, people will lie and deceive and cheat and hold their cards back and things like that, right? The idealist is that they're completely open in their negotiations and they want to share information and things like that. And then the pragmatist sort of sits in between. And they might say, well, if I have to, do a little white lie to get where I need to go, that's okay. Stuff like that, right? And you might not be too shocked to know that when I ask people to tell me where do they fall, the vast majority will say, I'm in the idealist school. Very few admit that they're in the poker school. And then you get a few people in the pragmatist realm, right? Part of this is how we view ourselves, right? And how we manage that ethical line, because we do come up against lots of ethical challenges and fine lines in negotiation. And I think one of the important things is to be pretty honest with yourself about what you're doing and why. And, my grandmother always used to say to me, you have your reputation in life. That's pretty much it. And if you tarnish it, you're going to lose in the end. And that's always been in the back of my mind, because I think when you're negotiating, we live in a small world, whether it's social media or whatever it might be, right? The world is small and people find out about your behavior and about your practices. And so you have to be really careful. And while you might feel like, I'm going to just do this and no one's going to really notice or nobody's going to really care, doesn't always work out that way. And it's not easy, by the way. I mean, there are these lines that get blurry in terms of achieving our objectives and things along those lines. But it is really important that you manage the ethical considerations carefully, because they can come back to haunt you, and they can impact the relationships that you have going forward.
In personal life, in personal relationships, in families, the ultimate ethical issue is, am I for myself alone, or am I also for you? So the process of win-win negotiating or conflict resolution or problem solving is a profoundly ethical skill and endeavor in a positive way. So you can, if you're accustomed to really listening, so what are your concerns in this situation? And you're accustomed to putting my concerns out on the table. And then we're really looking for a solution set with pieces responsive to all the concerns. And I put my hand in a column because we're not making my concerns versus your concerns. If you're really being ethical in the sense of genuinely looking for something that works well for both of you, all the concerns go in one column. Your concern becomes a concern of mine. My concerns are a concern of yours. So we're listing them like one list of bullet points. And then we're looking for a solution that works for both of us or all of us. That is a profoundly ethical exercise, phenomenon.
Thank you. Let's bring it home. We're going to go to the last segment about everyday negotiation.
Negotiation skills extend to everyday financial decisions. Whether negotiating a salary, reducing bills, or making major purchases, strategic techniques can lead to savings and better outcomes. For salary negotiations, research industry benchmarks, highlight personal contributions, and articulate value clearly. Choosing the right timing and preparing alternatives boosts leverage. For bills and service contracts, reviewing costs and comparing competitor rates create a strong starting point. Contacting providers, inquiring about promotions, and escalating requests often lead to better deals. Large purchases, such as cars and appliances, require thorough market research. Techniques like the foot-in-the-door approach, securing small concessions before making larger requests, help secure better terms. Demonstrating willingness to walk away adds bargaining power. By practicing these skills, individuals strengthen financial stability, reduce expenses, and make smarter purchasing decisions, leading to long-term financial benefits.
Keld, you said that the SMARTnership approach, it's largely applied to commercial, big companies buying, millions of pieces or thousands of pieces of ear pods. Can you use it? How do you use it in your everyday life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I would encourage everybody listening to start negotiating. I often found that Americans, and I'm generalizing, are bargain hunters. They don't negotiate. They don't challenge a price. They just go into a store and then they look at the suggested retail price and think, hey, that's the price. I'm often saying, well, it's not a price dictated by law, is it? So obviously it's up for negotiation if you are meeting somebody who got the mandate to negotiate. Let me give you a quick example of my concept of negotiation economics. If you go in to buy, let's say, a suit, right? That's what I do. I go in and buy a suit. Instead of asking for a discount of 20%, I find asking for a discount being unintelligent, because that's a win-lose game, right? I'm gaining a discount and the store, so they're losing the 20% and I'm gaining the 20%. Instead of doing that, I could be saying, well, if I buy the suit, I would like to get a shirt included in the price. Now, the margin in a branded clothing store might be 250% on a branded shirt, right? So that cost of giving me a shirt that is priced at $150 might be $30, but my value is obviously $150 because that is the retail price on that shirt. Now, giving me $150 in discount, buying a suit for $1,000 will cost him $150 and gain me $150, but getting a shirt will only cost him $20, $30, $40, whatever, and give me a benefit of $150. That's a very quick, basic example of the concept of negotiation economics. So yes, you can use it everywhere in your private life as well, even with your kids and your spouse and everywhere.
I like the approach. Linda, what are practical ways to ask outrageously in personal finance situations?
Well, I was thinking back to what you asked me before about kids. Maybe the only thing that worked with my kids was negotiating and asking them and having them deal with us. My husband's a financial planner, and some of the questions that he asks people are, do you really need this? Do you, what kind of, do you really need to spend this kind of money to get this? What other kind of discounts? And I'm with Keld. If I'm going to have multiple of things, or if I want to increase that pie before I try to start discounting on someone. So I'll say, I come to this restaurant all the time. Would you always have that corner booth, or could I always have a free appetizer, or whatever that is? Or, you're in the fast food line that isn't fast. How many times have we been there? So you've sat there and sat there and sat there. As you come around and say, hey, this fast food wasn't very fast. Can I have an extra French fry? Can I have an extra dessert? Start practicing on these little things so that when it's a big thing, it's not so scary.
Build that muscle. Josh, so many of us, we're nervous when we have to talk about salary negotiation. How can we negotiate with more confidence for something like our salary?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. And there's a phenomenon that a lot of people have told me, that when money's involved, it sort of changes the equation. They don't hesitate to ask nearly as much when it's other things, but when it comes down to money, they worry that they're going to be perceived as greedy, especially different groups in our society who are often just sort of told, you should just accept whatever is given to you. And the reality is that's not how you have to learn to negotiate. You're telling yourself a story about what's going to happen, and you're also playing that story out in your mind. So too often when I talk to people, for example, around salary negotiations, and I say, well, have you tried to do this before? And they will say yes, and it didn't go well. And so I now have that anxiety from those previous experiences that I'm bringing to this, right? Susan can relate to this from her perspective. And I try to help them to say, look, first of all, if you don't ask for something in negotiation, you're never going to get it. You already know the answer when you start. And but I think what's really important is do your homework. In the video, you talked about industry standards. Know what it is. There are sites like glassdoor.com and things like that that will give you what the appropriate salary is. So too often people just don't do their homework and they don't know why they're asking for things. And so it's very easy for an employer to say, well, why would I give you that? When, from a precedent point of view, I'm paying people who, for example, may have more experience than you, less than that. Right? So you have to know what you're doing. You have to do your homework and your preparation and know these industry standards that exist. And they do exist. And I think that gives you the comfort to say, what I'm asking is reasonable based on other people doing this work and this job. Because people will often say to me, well, did I get a good deal here? Is this reasonable? And I'll say, well, what kind of homework have you really done to determine what your value is and what your worth is that comes from elsewhere, right? Anybody can say, I want this much, but it has to be based on some form of reality. Otherwise, it will come across in a, sort of a very negative and almost fanciful kind of way.
Well, and on the salary, you want to ask for what you're going to do in the future. You've already been paid for what's already been in the past. So based on what I've done in the past, this is what I want to do in the future. That makes your boss have an easier time at saying yes.
So negotiating at home, it's been fascinating to listen. What's the same and what's different? And again, when I say negotiating at home, I'm saying discussing and deciding together how to solve issues where you differ, whatever you call it, problem solving, conflict resolution, whatever. So for one thing, Josh mentioned do your homework. I think almost everybody has said you've got to go out and look what's standards in the field for whatever it is you're asking for. How do you do that at home? What's the equivalent? So you ask a slightly different question at home. You ask, what about this is important, or what are your concerns? And you have to be able to put out, look, my concern is, because the issues are not about money as much, although that can be part of it. More often it's about the division of labor, who's going to do what. It's about how to treat the children when the children are misbehaving. It's about what shall we do this summer on the kids' vacation. It's about anything and everything. You left your clothes on the floor, sexual, how much, what kind, all these issues. So instead of looking for external standards that you can compare against, it becomes really important that you can look inside. Well, look, my concern is, and that you can ask the other, so what's important to you here?
Yeah, Susan, to that point, I just chime in. I have 3 daughters, and often I would say, I would explain my underlying interest. I didn't, I would never say to them, I said so because I didn't like that when my parents said it to me or whatever. So I would say, look, the reason you can't go do this is because I'm concerned about your safety, right? And all of a sudden they're like, okay, now how do I argue with my father who's concerned about my safety and who cares about me and loves me? It's a very different conversation. And it's very, very hard to argue that. And it, in fact, pulls us away from arguing about it, right? Because it's me caring about them and getting down to that underlying level of concern, interest, et cetera. So for me, I don't look so much to industry standards at home with my wife and children and whatever. I talk much more about why it is that I'm worried about something or concerned.
Exactly. And when you're able to put your concerns on the table, well, I'm worried about your safety, then the solution may be, okay, you can go to that party provided your older brother goes with you. You can find a win-win solution. Yeah. Or maybe they'll say, Dad, you were right. It doesn't sound like a very safe place. There'll be a lot of drugs there. And the two of you can create an altogether different option. Hey, How about if you invite all your friends over? Like you can have 40 people over on Saturday night and we'll have a party here. Oops, I just dropped something.
Bring the party home.
Exactly.
I like
So
it.
the point is if you access both verbalize and listen to and invite the other person to verbalize their underlying concerns, creating solutions that are genuinely win-win, responsive to all the concerns, it becomes very easy once you've got the formula.
Great. Here's a first on Inspired Money. Maybe we should do this all the time. Linda has requested that we take a picture of the panel. We're going to take a quick photo before we wrap. I don't know if you guys want to smile, do a funny thing. I don't know. Look serious, look happy. All right, hopefully Bradley got a photo. I think I got a photo. Before we wrap, there's one quick question from our audience. Kevin was asking, he has a contract with company A, which in the past 5 years has gone really well. However, due to some reason, they're not that collaborative anymore for the extension of a contract. What would be the best steps for to continue?
I'll go for that one. I'd ask what their concerns are. What's holding them back from the kind of goodwill discussions we've had in the past? What's on your minds?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. So right spot on, Susan. I think it's getting down to the underlying interest. There's a reason why things have changed. And I think if you do have that kind of a relationship, you've worked with them for 5 years, you can say, listen, we have collaborated really well. Like, what's going on? And I think this is back to Keld's point about relationships, right? You have the ability to ask that question because you have worked well for 5 years, and they're more likely to tell you, hey, here's what's changed on our end, and here's that we've got going.
You usually have a champion if you've been working there 5 years. Backtrack 5 years before that would be to make sure you have multiple contacts there. But if they're all of a sudden ghosting, there's something going on. See if you can get your champion on the phone. And if you can do it off the record kind of and just say, hey, what is going on? Or what's up? Sometimes it's just been a mistake. Sometimes the bosses have changed. There's always something going on back at the farm, and they'll tell you.
Thank you. Keld, any last comment?
No, I think it's been great. I learned a lot today. It's wonderful being with amazing colleagues here. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the Inspired Moneymaker for watching. It has been an incredibly informative discussion, and I hope that you found this discussion on negotiation as enlightening as I have. My biggest takeaway, preparation. It's really the foundation of effective negotiation, whether it's understanding the other side's interests or managing your own mindset. The work that you do beforehand, before you enter the room, really makes a difference. But then it's the active listening and asking the right questions and really to dive in and to do it. I think that you have to get comfortable getting uncomfortable, ask lots of questions, and continue to build that muscle. That's really a game changer that can turn a tough conversation into a win-win situation. Here's my challenge for you this week. Think about an upcoming negotiation you might have, whether it's at work or home, or even haggling for a better deal. Take just 10 minutes to prepare by outlining your objectives, anticipating the other party's needs, considering how you'll communicate effectively. You might be surprised by how much more confident and in control you feel. If you like this episode, please share it with someone that you think could benefit by sharpening their negotiation skills. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a future episode of Inspired Money. Oh, there's one more question that I kind of saw there. Let me see if I can put that back. Let's say, wait, this is what we covered already.
Previous one. Yeah.
I think we're good. So a big thank you to our Small But Mighty team. Excellent segment edits from Bradley Eaglefeather and graphic animations by Chad Lawrence. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Be sure to follow them and find out more.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing. So Dr. Keld Jensen, you can find him at keldjensen.com. Keld, any other place you want to point people to?
Yeah, well, I always love when people want to buy one of my books, and they are everywhere where you buy books, obviously. So yeah.
Buy his books. Dr. Joshua Weiss, you can find him at joshuanweiss.com. Do I have that right?
You got it. Yep.
And buy his newest book, Getting Back to the Table. Linda Swindling, you can find her at lindaswindling.com. That's lindaswindling.com. And Dr. Susan Heitler, you can find her many articles at psychologytoday.com or her website, therapyhelp.com. And Susan, you're holding up books, so I'll let you point.
If the whole goal of these books is to give people the tools for being able to negotiate their personal life in a way that's win-win and builds love and a happy family.
I love it. Well, thank you for empowering me to be better prepared at the dinner table tonight. I'm going to have a good discussion with my 3 kids and my wife. I think that they will still win, but I will be happy that we meet a happy outcome. The next Inspired Money episode will be understanding behavioral finance, how emotions and cognitive biases impact investment decisions. That will be March 5th at 1 p.m. Until next time, do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens. Thank you, everyone.